We need to become more and more who God calls us to be. And I want to thank, again, Father Quill for organizing this wonderful celebration of faith. Because as we observe the 50th anniversary of the Selma Montgomery March, it is good, first of all, that we remember that the whole civil rights movement was at its core, at its foundation, a religious movement. And it is good that we as Catholics come and remember the role of the Catholic Church in that. Not that our celebration, our observance, is separate from the broader one. Just the opposite. We want to be part of it and not forget our history and let that history challenge us to more and more become who we're supposed to be. As we begin, as we celebrate here, observe here 50 years, let me give a little bit of history about the Catholic Church here in Alabama. In Mobile, where Alabama began, there was a lady there named Dorothy, quite a historian. And she wanted in Mobile to have an African American heritage trade. And she worked so hard, she and many others, to put up historic plaques to remind people of the African American heritage. Well, one time, she was at the cathedral, our Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, that beautiful cathedral facility. Being quite a historian, she was being shown the baptismal registers there that go back to 1703. By the way, that church, that congregation, is the oldest congregation of any denomination, any religion, anywhere in Alabama. That's the first place where God was worshiped. But as she looked through the baptismal register, she blurted out, "They have names." See, she was looking at the entries for all the baptisms for slaves. And she said, "I've never seen this before in any other document. These baptismal registers in the 1700s, 1800s. She said, anywhere else where slaves are mentioned, all it has is gender and age. Male, 32 years old. Female, 28 years old. Whatever. And she says, in here, they have names. And when she saw that, she says, I have to put up an African American heritage plaque here. And if you ever go down to Mobile, yes indeed, there it is right outside. Because she said, here there was Dickens fellowship. They had names. Nowhere else but here. Yes, they had names. You have names. I have names. All of God's children got names. A little more history. 1957. There was a young Baptist minister who lived here in Montgomery. He and his wife, her name was Coretta. They were about to have a baby. Where'd he go? They went to the Catholic hospital. You know, there were only 2 hospitals in Alabama at that time where an African American doctor and African American nurse could be hired. They were both owned by the Archdiocese of Mobile. Martin Ford's Hospital in Mobile, St. Jude. They went to the Catholic hospital because they knew they would be treated with dignity. By the way, I think it was 2 years later, they had their second child. They came back to the Catholic hospital. That building right out there. they've received dignity. A couple weeks later, March, last night, coming into Montgomery. Where are they going to spend the last night? Not many people want it. Where they stay? The Catholic Church, St. Jude. Right out there in that place. Why would they ask the Catholic Church? Because they'd be treated with dignity and God. And none of this happened just on the spur of the moment. Why would that Baptist minister come to a Catholic hospital? Why would the March's injured go to a Catholic hospital? Why would the March's come here? Because for decades, priests, brothers, nuns, sisters had been ministering in the African American community, opening schools, social service centers, hospitals, showing dignity. Now, I'm not going to tell you, but the history of the Catholic Church is perfect. And that's not going to shock anybody. Was it perfect when those names were being written down in the baptismal register in the 1700s, 1800s? Was it perfect when the Catholic hospital welcomed injured marchers? No. When that young Baptist minister and his wife came to the birthday of age? No. When the marchers came? No. Our love of the church is not perfect. But I gotta tell you something. I still love it. My mom was not perfect. She's gone to the Lord. But let me tell you, even though she wasn't perfect, I loved her. And I loved my mother, the church. I wouldn't know about Jesus Christ without the church. Church taught through many people my faith. But in all the history of the church, whether we have been totally faithful to it or not, there's always been that challenge to treat people with dignity. Sometimes we've been good at that, and sometimes we haven't. Let me tell you, if anyone here has ever been hurt, if everyone feels that their dignity was not respected in a Catholic ministry church as Archbishop, I sincerely apologize. We go forward. I'm not where I used to be. I'm not where I should be, but at least I'm not where I used to be. We go forward. And that was really the message of Reverend Martin Luther King. We just heard the whole basis of the civil rights movement in that first reading of Justice, where God says, let us create man in our image. We are created in the image and likeness of God. And that is the whole message of the civil rights movement. That each one of us shares a fundamental dignity. Because God has created us. And Reverend Martin Luther King challenged our country to recognize that. And first and foremost, it was a religious movement. I gotta tell you, a little thing that I noticed. A lot of people were referring to Dr. Martin Luther King. And there's nothing wrong with that. I do that myself. But I prefer to refer to him as Reverend Martin Luther King. Because you can't understand Martin Luther King without realizing he was a Baptist minister. And the core of his message was that we are created in the image and likeness of God, all of God's children are created in the image and likeness of God. And I know in our secular society sometimes, we get a little uncomfortable with that. preach the fundamental equality that we all share because we're children of God. So I was up in Washington, D.C. I visited his monument there on the wall. It is impressive. It's wonderful. If you've never seen it, I've heard some times you can see it. And they have quotes from his speeches there. I was impressed with the monument. I got to tell you, good people, I was not totally impressed with the passages that were selected from his speeches. Because of this, there's no mention of God. I never thought I could see a monument to a Baptist preacher that has no mention of God. Because when you read his speeches, there's plenty about God. But sometimes we're a little uncomfortable to talk about God. He wasn't. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was not uncomfortable about saying that this is a religious movement. You know, the organization he started was called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It was not called the Southern Democrat Leadership Conference, the Southern Republican Leadership Conference, the Southern AFL-CIO Leadership Conference. It was called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference because that's who he was. He was a man of God who said, we're all Christ. And we should remember that at this milestone of 50 years. Who we are. We are God's children. And all of us are God's children. And in remembering that, and remembering our dignity, we're called to remember the dignity of everyone else. And that's our challenge today, too. To continue to call our nation to respect everyone. Because we're still not where we should be. We still have a long march to go. In many ways, that we can treat one another with dignity. You know, sometimes we can see things that are different from very different points of view. And all that tells us is that more and more we need to talk. Across lines, across groups. The more we talk, the more we can grow in understanding, respect of one another's views. And it's not just color. It's not just ethnic background. There are people today that we need to ask ourselves, how do we respect their dignity? The dignity of the person lying in the bed of nursing home. The dignity of the unborn child. The dignity of the immigrant. Oh, the list goes on. All of God's children have dignity. And we got to keep saying, okay, where am I not the person that I need to be? Thank God I'm not who I used to be. But I'm not there. As an individual, we're not there yet. As a church, we're not there yet. As a nation, we're not there yet. But the message that was spoken of 50 years ago tonight, 50 years ago tomorrow, is a message we need to continue to hear. We are created in the image and likeness of God, all of us. All of us. You know, I want to compliment you all here at St. Jude, right over there. There is a hospital that is shining light but respecting dignity. It's that hospital there for the young people. Where young people, because of their developmental issues, they can't speak or move their arms or move their legs, but they're treated with dignity. They can never live at home. They'll never live with their family. They'll never get out of bed and walk. They're human beings that are treated with dignity. All of God's children got dignity. And we need to remember that. No matter who we are, no matter who the other person is, all of God's children got dignity. So that's our challenge. And as a people of faith, we come together and worship here this evening. Let's remember that 50 years another with that God.